Well, hello there, and welcome, in a manner of speaking, to Digital Foundry Direct Weekly number 158. And this is, of course, our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. A fair bit to get through this week, but first of all, I've been instructed to start pimping the Digital Foundry store.digitalfoundry.net for all of our merchandising wares. And actually, we've got some promotions happening at the moment, so do check that out. We have, just checking notes here from Will, our first ever warehouse sale, 30% off our classic logo tees, which I am kind of wearing at the moment. The DF beanie, that's on sale. The motherboard sticker and the DF Fighters poster. I took a look at that earlier. Some big discounts, so do check that out. But let's crack on with the news. First of all, joining me, Oliver Mackenzie. Hello.
Hey, Rich. I looked up the other day and I've edited over 100 of these. So let's make it a...
Holy crap.
Yeah. So this should be fun.
It's still going strong.
Still going strong. No signs of stopping. Not yet.
Yeah. And Alex Battaglia, hi.
You should introduce Oliver as the man, the machine, you know, because he edits these things like a madman. Yeah, awesome stuff to talk about this week. Exciting times. I'm also wearing some DF merch, the motherboard shirt, so check that out if you want to.
Okay, so I think we've held up our contractual obligations with the DF store. Yeah, lots to get through this week, as per normal, so I guess, well, let's get on with it. Okay, so first news story of the week, an exclusive that came from Jez Corden, Windows Central. Apparently, Microsoft is establishing a game preservation / future compatibility team. And yeah, interesting sort of choice of phrasing there. And, you know, if you go to look at the Windows Central article, there's actual comments from Sarah Bond, chief of Xbox, about what's actually going to be happening with this team. And essentially, well, they formed a new team dedicated to game preservation, which they say is important to all of us at Xbox and the industry itself. And yeah, I can attest to that because, you know, John, Alex and I spoke to Phil Spencer at Gamescom precisely about this topic. Building on our strong history of delivering backwards compatibility to our players, and we remain committed to bringing forward the amazing library of Xbox games for future generations of players to enjoy. I'm going to go to you first of all, Oliver, on this because, well, actually, no, let's talk about some supporter questions first of all. Hi guys, I've noticed that Microsoft are at it again with backwards compatibility and was wondering what your thoughts on the subject. What your thoughts are on the subject. Are there any titles you'd hope to see in the next batch of games? That's from Mr. Bespoke. This one from Stefan ST. Hi guys, I'm surprised by the news that Microsoft formed a new team for game preservation. I thought Microsoft already had a team since the Xbox One days, establishing 360 and Xbox OG back compat. We know that this work stopped at some point, but what happened since then? And this one from Johnny_5A. Microsoft's preservation team sounds a lot like the back compat team that got closed up before the series console's launch. I think it actually persisted beyond that. Mm-hmm. Is it the same idea, or is there some key difference in approach? Would be great if they'd figure out how to handle the orphan games whose rights are now in limbo. It does kind of sound a bit like that, but with a twist, right, Oliver?
Yeah, my guess would basically be that the existing Microsoft backwards compatibility team was working on backwards compatible games for Xbox consoles, and this is going to be broader. Because just reading through the lines here, we know that the next console might not be a full AMD box. We know that Microsoft is taking explorations into possibly doing something with Windows, doing something with Xbox, combining those two in some sense. And we know that they were exploring an ARM CPU design. So the fact that they're making this much noise about game preservation, to me, probably adds more fuel to the fire that this won't be a traditional AMD console box, and then it might be something broader, something else, something with potentially more hardware SKUs in the mix. Because in that case, achieving backwards compatibility would be hard, and if it's just an AMD box, achieving backwards compatibility should be relatively trivial, at least with their existing library of titles, or it should be relatively easy. And I think Microsoft has done a better job than other platform holders with backwards compatibility by like a good margin, because a ton of 360 titles are playable on Xbox One. Ton of, and all those are carried over to the Xbox Series, obviously. And those all have enhancements, or many of them have enhancements. Certainly all of them have a more stable frame rate, generally speaking, but like you get 4K resolution on some titles, 60 FPS on some titles with both, like Final Fantasy 13-2, which is just fantastic on Xbox Series. You get a 3 times resolution boost there. You get 60 FPS rendering. It's like the best way to play that game. The only pain point here that I think about just looking at this kind of announcement and where I think they'll go with it is that it probably does only apply to digital purchases. Speaking for John here, because they don't have a commitment to physical media. Obviously, Xbox Adorably All Digital doesn't have a disk drive, and probably their next console won't either. Maybe they'll have some accommodation for disk drive owners down the line, but yeah, that's the only thing that to me is like a little bit of a thorn in these kinds of announcements, is the idea that like, yeah, you won't be able to keep your entire library of 360 digital titles with you, but maybe you'll have, or rather 360 physical titles, but maybe you'll have some accommodation for those digital titles.
Alex?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with everything Oliver said. I actually do think the specific wording of saying game preservation, which talks about actually game preservation, is going far beyond like backwards compatibility. That's a different wording altogether, and I think it's very purposeful, because I actually almost think of like generalized emulation at that point when I think of phrases like that. And future compatibility is basically the problem of, okay, so we have the current box. How do we get the things from the current box to run on the future box? And the fact that it needs to be problematized to the point where they need an entire team dedicated to this, it really does actually say to me, and I think it says to a lot of people, that the next Xbox is going to be different enough on either a hardware or software level that it requires an entire team dedicated to try and make it work. And they'll make it work. I mean, it's Microsoft. They're going to make it work. It's just a matter of like, what does it actually look like in the end? And I'm very curious about the physical proposition, because when Oliver was talking about that, I actually thought about how actually when Steam started, there was an initiative to register your games that you had physically with Steam. I did it with Doom 3 and with Half-Life 2, I believe. Or was it? No, I didn't do it with Half-Life 2. I did it with Doom 3, but basically you could input like a CD key into Steam and it would activate the product there. It existed actually for a number of games up until like midway through like Steam's lifespan in like 2010 to 2011. And this was a way that you could transfer partially some aspects of your library of those publishers that had agreements with Steam into the digital space. And I'm curious if there's a way that Microsoft could leverage that with Xbox Series X owners, for example, or some other method, for example, where you could take a physical game and turn it into a digital copy. I'm very curious if they could do something like that. But I'm just so curious about what this next Xbox is, because yeah, you don't need this if it's going to be just that plain old AMD grab bag. So what is it? I want to know, Microsoft.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about this for some time, but there is a move to produce ARM-based Windows laptops, and there's a Qualcomm chip coming soon that does just that. There's been footage of it running Baldur's Gate at 1080p 30,
right?
Which for a low power device would be pretty remarkable. So yeah, there is going to be some sort of x86, x64 to ARM sort of conversion layer going on there. And I guess they could leverage that work if they're going to move across to ARM. And I do think at some point it's going to make a lot of sense to do that, right? In terms of transistor counts, in terms of efficiency, all of this stuff is great for a console and you'd want to leverage it. It also opens the door to other vendors, right? Because, if you're able to produce a Windows experience or maybe even an Xbox experience on ARM, then, suddenly NVIDIA enters the fray. They're locked out of console SoCs as monolithic designs at the moment because they don't have an x86 license. So, we could well be seeing Windows laptops that are entirely NVIDIA based, which would be quite intriguing and, perhaps opens the door to something happening on Xbox. The difference there is that we seem to be talking about sort of low-end devices at the moment with the Qualcomm chip, But here we're talking about what Microsoft is describing as the greatest generational leap ever. Words to that effect. Something which we can talk about later. The game preservation side of things and the back compat team. I mean, there are titles, maybe even ABK, Activision Blizzard King titles that should be on Xbox but can't be at the moment because they're kind of locked to 360 and maybe even OG Xbox. So just having a team to finish up the job there, so to speak, would be great. I was actually just did a bit of Googling on Singularity, which is a game I have quite a amount of affection for. It's not backwards compatible, as I understand it right now. That would, So suddenly Microsoft is got this huge range of games that you'd kind of want to have on Xbox, right? I mean, they own them now, so why not? Unless there's some sort of arcane licensing rights. So there's a lot for this team to do, and I am still intrigued by this whole concept of a potential dovetailing of sorts between console and PC, because I think Phil is on the record, and he mentioned to us at Gamescom that PC is basically a great platform for game preservation, right? Because it's where everything is, and you're kind of not locked to specific console hardware and backwards compatibility issues. It's just there, and this the Xbox is obviously essentially a slimmed down PC, so why not? Interesting stuff. I mean, it's great that this team is back in existence, assuming it went away at some point,
Yeah, it's more like we just didn't hear anything about it for so long that we just assumed, right, that it was gone.
What's really exciting about this is just Microsoft's track record on this stuff. Basically what they did in bringing, PowerPC CPU code to x86 with 360 back compat is, I think it's one of the highlights of any console generation. When that announcement was made at E3, it was like, no way. There were rumblings. There was even a leak from Microsoft saying, yeah, we're working on this. But nobody could quite believe it because it didn't quite seem plausible. And then it happened, and it had some issues, but then it got better and better and better and better. And this is kind of, you apply that moving forward to new hardware. Wow. And I think the future's safe with Xbox in terms of continuing that generational support for all of those different Xboxes onto future hardware, which may well be very, very different. I do think something to sort of pick you up on there, Oliver. I think there's no guarantee at the moment that it's either an AMD box or not an AMD box. We just don't really know at this point, but the groundwork is being laid for something that could be very different. We just don't really know at the moment.
Yeah, certainly, just looking at what they're kind of saying here, looking at what they've been saying and what Phil's been hinting at, because Phil does tend to hint a lot. It does sort of...
Well, to be fair, I mean, he doesn't really hint. It's happening. When he's hinting, he's saying it because it's going to happen.
Yeah. So, one obvious way to achieve the biggest generational leap in Xbox history would be to put a 5090 in there or something, right? That's the obvious.
That'd be sick.
Yeah.
It's called the PC.
In one SKU, in one of 100 SKUs or something, there's a super high-end console. And I think it definitely is the kind of thing that does hint towards a more varied hardware platform, at least. And hopefully they'll bring back some of these game enhancements, because I remember they were talking about doing 4K 60 with Gears of War. They were talking about doing more discrete game enhancements. And we did see some of that for Xbox Series, but not all of it. And I'd certainly like to see more work being done with that, because that was really interesting. And as far as I'm concerned, on the 360 side, there's a ton of games that are available. On the original Xbox side, it's much more limited. I think it's a library of 20 games, or it's a very limited library of games.
Yeah.
Right. It's not all
primarily licensing issues.
Licensing issues are obviously a huge problem, but I would like to see, if possible, just a little bit more titles brought forward from that console, if licensing issues could be sorted out.
Yeah, I mean, the announcement, or it wasn't really even an announcement, it was an internal email from Sarah Bond that was leaked and then confirmed by Microsoft. It's very vague, really. You can read a lot into it, and it all comes down to what is the makeup of this next generation machine going to be. But also, I suspect we're probably going to learn a lot more about the handheld a lot sooner, which may well lay the groundwork for, the architecture of the later machines and how they're going to handle this transition, because it does sound quite profound. I mean, Phil does seem to really want to be able to turn his Legion Co into an Xbox, doesn't he?
Yeah. I'm actually so excited for this. I was just thinking about it. I woke up this morning. I was like, God, I'm getting kind of like, when I was looking at the sheet, I was like kind of getting that like vibe of like the Xbox 360, like difference. Like you were just looking at like such a much more powerful machine, maybe like a lot more features, bringing in, I remember the media center capabilities of the Xbox 360 being a big touting thing at the time, kind of dovetailing in with Windows XP Media Center Edition. There's all these things that I'm just like, I'm hoping for the new Xbox strategy to like really tie in PC. And this, if it is a more generalized emulation route, instead of doing what they did in the past, it could be very interesting, because it could also mean not just backwards compatibility for future Xbox consoles. It could also mean backwards compatibility for Windows. Something that I've really wanted for a long time was the ability to play an Xbox 360 game that never got a port on Windows officially through Windows devices, instead of having to rely on community emulators, which don't have full coverage, which are, you're wholly reliant upon years of like outside research looking in, instead of the people who made the box can maybe make an emulator. I think that would be my nth degree goal for all of this as a PC player, but we'll see what this means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. When you look back to OG Xbox and Xbox 360, those were two consoles which were, ahead of their time, and, they were bringing new features to the forefront, and we kind of got, basically, we sort of moved into a period of multi-platform development that basically necessitated AMD hardware, and it necessitated AMD hardware to a set budget, and we kind of had an uninspiring box in the form of Xbox One, a pretty incredible one with Xbox One X, and decent hardware with Series S/X, but at the same time, I see exactly where you're coming from, Alex, because that 360 was ahead of PC in many regards, and that's kind of been sort of left by the wayside, and it's to the point now where we're sort of looking at the next generation Xbox as being sort of as good as what PC is doing now in terms of NVIDIA features, when arguably with Microsoft steering the DirectX APIs and whatnot, you'd want them to be almost a step ahead of that.
You're way ahead of that. That's the thing, because like DX12 Ultimate was, the thing that brought parity of Xbox features to the PC. But NVIDIA was already there like 2 years before release, like with the DX12 Ultimate, Turing's DX12 Ultimate. So I would like to see whatever the next box is to pioneer new aspects of DX that we just don't see. And I think that's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Something I want to pick up from previous direct discussions concerns this concept of third-party markets appearing on Xbox, and a reasonable sort of rebuttal to our contention that we're talking about essentially Windows compatibility to make that possible. Somebody just said, well, maybe it is just third-party stores appearing on Xbox, and it would be an alternative place to buy Xbox conversions of games. What do you think about that, Oliver?
Oh, that's
Doesn't
pretty
quite make
uninteresting.
sense to me.
Yeah,
What
is that?
Yeah, I don't know necessarily why you'd proactively bring in third parties to sell existing Xbox software, because it doesn't do anything for you. I can understand if compelled by court order, but I don't know. As a platform holder, you're bringing in
sooner or later that could happen.
Right, sooner or later that could happen, but I wouldn't expect Microsoft to be trying to explore that approach proactively. I'd expect some judge from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals saying, "Hey, you have to do this." Sorry,
what if it's a dark horse? A dark horse to make Sony's hand, how do you say the hand? We're going to do it. We're going to sync our own box to sync yours. I have no idea.
Yeah, but
I don't think it. I don't think it would sync the box.
I know.
I think it would basically allow. It would basically become the one box that plays them all.
Yeah,
essentially, right?
If you're going to tear that much of a hole in your whole licensing arrangement for your consoles, the whole blades and razors model, I think you'd do it for a bigger ask than just EGS can sell you a copy of the new Call of Duty. I think that's personally my read on it, but I could be wrong. But I would hope certainly that it involves something much deeper on a technical level that is actually delivering new and interesting software instead of just more interesting deals. That's my own personal perspective.
Absolutely. I don't think we've got too much more to say about this, except obviously it's intriguing. We'd like to know more. We know there's going to be some kind of hardware announcement during the end of the year. I still think it's probably going to be handheld first, but even so, just the opportunity to get some sort of visibility on what those handheld plans are and the extent to which it sort of dovetails with PC, I think that's quite an interesting thing to look forward to, assuming that is actually what's going to happen. But for now, I guess we should move on to the next news topic. Okay, so the world's going Fallout crazy at the moment. There's a new TV show on Amazon Prime. I've watched the first episode. It's really, really good, so do check that out. But to tie into that, there's all manner of sales promotions happening with Fallout at the moment. And the announcement that Fallout 4's next generation upgrade is coming soon. I think it's April 25th, if memory serves. And yes, it's been announced that there's going to be a performance mode and a quality mode, frame rates up to 60 frames per second. Interesting stuff. Now, I guess, Oliver, the curious thing here is that, well, you can already play Fallout 4K 60 frames per second on Xbox via a very simple mod. And meanwhile, there's FPS Boost that does 1080p 60. What are you expecting from this mod?
Well, from the patch?
Yeah, it's the patch. Sorry, I was going to say a mod. That's my key question.
Releasing the mod visually.
I guess that's my key question, whether it is actually going to be anything more than a mod, so to speak, or whether there is actually going to be some extensive retooling to the game.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that the Series X version, from what I recall, does seem to run the game at a decent 4K 60. And that's sort of what you'd expect, given that I think the Xbox One X version of the game was running at 4K. So the Series X often in titles, you see it basically double GPU-bound performance relative to Xbox One X, which is, I think, when you see that title. Then you also have the FPS Boost version, which does 1080p 60, like you mentioned. So it is kind of curious, like what would a next-gen console patch for Fallout look like on the Xbox Series consoles, but what would it look like in terms of that performance quality divide? Because you already basically have what you'd want from a quality mode or a performance mode, a quality mode in the performance mode, I should say. So that does seem a little bit more curious. On the PlayStation side, it makes more sense because that functionality is not available to gamers. So that would make more sense. It would also be interesting to see what they do with these versions, because the original titles are quite old, so you'd think they might be hard to update, but maybe they're doing PS5 or Xbox Series versions, or maybe they've just been updating the older versions often enough, and they have a familiarity with that code base. Maybe they're newer versions of the SDKs. So I think it's interesting. I think it's compelling. I certainly think it'd be interesting to see how these work when they do come out. But it's not a huge jump from what we already have from a technical perspective, at least on the Xbox Series side of things, unless we're missing something.
Yeah. I guess the question from my perspective, Alex, is whether it's going to be a native app or back compat plus.
Yeah. You'll get extras for that specifically on the PlayStation 5 side. Like you were just talking about, the Xbox advantages for that, or maybe some better GPU resources, maybe better usage of the GPU. I don't know. Here, I'm also curious about what they're going to do on PC, because I'm reading the description here and I'm a little embarrassed by the person who wrote this description, unfortunately. You can tell me what you think is wrong with this. We are also releasing a free Fallout 4 update for PC players! Experience Fallout 4 on your next generation PC with widescreen and ultra widescreen support. Why are they saying that the game now supports widescreen? What is that about? It always supported widescreen. Maybe not ultra wide, but yeah, that's a thing. So on PC, the current release of Fallout 4, it's like a kind of legacy title at this point. It's like one of those games that obviously works with Windows 11, but we're talking about, what is this, when did this game come out?
2015.
Gosh. Yeah, so we're talking about like 9 years old almost, and Windows updates between now and then, driver updates between now and then. The fact that the game was not super polished in some areas. It means it has a lot of legacy issues. Like one of them is that like a lot of creation engine games, like every single creation engine game has this issue where if you go above 60 FPS, the physics go out of whack, excluding Starfield. Like, will they reship the game with broken physics above 60 FPS? Like, your widescreen and ultra widescreen monitor is not going to be a 60 hertz one these days. Like what are they going to do? Are they going to ship the game with a 60 FPS cap in place, like in the past? Like, I don't know, like what they're going to do there. I'm also a little curious. The game has NVIDIA Flex physics, I think it's called. It's like one of the updates to PhysX. So it's like a GPU physics that does, like debris and stuff that flies around on the screen when you shoot stuff. As far as I know, it can cause like issues and crashing in the current version of Windows and the current drivers. Are they going to update it to not do that anymore? Like if they just release the game with like certain things but not fixing the legacy issues, I think that's actually like it's a little bit wasteful, because ultra wide is nice, but having things work at like proper refresh rates and also not crashing is more important. I really wish that this PR blurb actually said like these things instead of just widescreen support, whatever the heck that means. So I mean, I'm not a huge Fallout 4 fan. I'm not even a huge Fallout 3 fan for that matter, but I would like to see that they actually went back in and changed some great things. But we'll know soon enough. April 25th is not too far around the corner, and I think however we cover this, and we will cover it, I imagine we're going to do like the usual, what's the name of that mission where you run up to the top of like this
Yeah, the Corvega factory.
Thank you.
I was reviewing Tom's content on this before.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, like how poorly that ran on Xbox One and even PS4 to a degree.
Yeah.
We're probably going to do that. Unfortunately, Tom's probably going to get settled in with this a little bit. But I bet Tom hates this game.
I'm sure he relishes it.
Yeah. But I also probably want to cover it to just answer generic questions of like, okay, can you play this at a high refresh rate now? Does it crash? How's the usability? I
get what you're saying. Absolutely. Yeah. Two sort of points from my perspective. First of all, I mean, if you go to the DF channel and just look for FPS boost Fallout, you could actually see the game running at 4K 60 or up to 4K 60, to use the, as you describe it, PR blurb parlance. And the Corvega factory steel tanks there, but most of the time it's actually 4K 60, which is great just from the mod. So I'm wondering whether they've actually gone in and retooled it and spruced it up and actually
right.
Produced something that's a bit better than the mod. You'd hope so, if they've got bespoke quality and performance modes.
Yeah.
And you're quite right, on the PlayStation side, I'm not quite sure if the mod was ever moved across to PlayStation. All it did was tell the game to turn off VSync, and then the back compat thing kicked in to turn VSync back on. But you effectively got unlocked frame rate with that. So
that's cool.
So yes, very curious to see if the lion's share of the improvements are actually on the PlayStation side. I am you asked for my comments on the PR blurb there, Alex. I am amused at the concept that you need a next generation PC to enjoy widescreen and ultra wide support.
Yeah, you definitely need like a 4090.
Break out the 4090 egregious edition for that ultra wide screen support.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
But you're quite right. The concept that the game may still have issues running above 60 frames per second would be egregious, and surely has to be addressed for your next generation PC.
Yeah. As far as I know, maybe even Fallout 76 has these issues. Please comment below this web zone if that is the truth.
Yep. They're saying it's also going to be Steam Deck verified, which you'd expect from an older game.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Should be no trouble.
What if you load this up on the OLED and it has frame rate, it has physics issues because it's 90 hertz? There's like these things. Like, is it really Steam Deck verified? We'll see.
Well, Steam Deck verification simply, I think, It just means it's got to run at a stable 30. And even then, a lot of the games that are Steam Deck verified don't run at a stable 30. So it's kind of like, I think there needs to be a bit more policing going on with the concept of what Steam Deck verified actually means.
I agree.
But yes, I mean, it's a big game. And I think, ultimately we're talking about, yes, you can do this already with a mod, but most people, 99.9% of the population out there won't even be aware of the mod. So the concept that you are actually getting a proper, properly directed 4K 60 mode, hopefully 4K 60, is only a good thing. I think that's all I've got to say about that. So let us move on to the next news topic. Okay, next news story. This week, Ubisoft revealed a story trailer for Star Wars Outlaws, which I don't know if you've seen any of the gameplay footage previously, but man, this is looking like an absolutely astonishing game built on the next generation Snowdrop engine. We've also got a date. I think it's August 30th, if memory serves. Should have noted it on the sheet, but I didn't. But Alex, tell us what you think about this trailer. I mean, I guess it kicks off with the usual in-engine disclaimer, which basically means you could be looking at anything. But we know the pedigree of this engine at this point, and it's astonishing, really, isn't it?
Yeah. In fact, I'm really going to assume the end game is that we get in our hands, especially on PC, is going to look better than this trailer. And there's a lot of reasons that I'm just going to talk about right now. So I actually liked the original trailer we saw for this game. It was kind of like when we talked about it right next to when we started talking about Avatar, Frontiers of Pandora more. And then back then we commented on a number of things that we just showed us very well that it was real time. And even back then, before they announced it, I was like, this has to be using RTGI. One thing that I actually kind of disliked about this trailer, I know it's the entire purpose of the trailer is to introduce you to the world, introduce you to the good guys and the bad guys and the gray neutral characters and all these things. But since it is so vignette cut, like we're just like every new scene, like every couple seconds, you don't actually get a good sense of like a lot of like graphical quality things because you're seeing just like non-contiguous gameplay and or cutscene smatterings. And so that makes it harder to judge certain aspects of the visual quality. But I think it still looks very good. And it looks pretty much the exact same, minus a couple of things than what we saw last time around. For example, one thing that I noticed in this trailer that actually kind of bothered me was the fact that depending upon the shot, motion blur was off or it is on. And it led to a semi-inconsistent presentation, I thought. Especially for something that is like a cinematic story trailer where it's all about that, more or less. So that's one thing I think the final game is going to look better. Like, I don't think they're going to let you... Well, they may let you turn it off on console, but I think it's going to be like on by default and it's going to look good.
Okay.
What I really liked that you could still see aspects of the GI in this trailer, especially in the one shot with like the stormtroopers and this like they're like
in the alley.
I don't know. The alley shot. I think that's like where you see from above, like that it's being skylit primarily, and that's something that's pretty hard to do without RTGI in a good way. One thing that actually kind of bothered me, I actually like the main character design quite a bit, and I think it looks a lot like super retro Star Wars stuff. It's like person looks like they're straight out of like 1981. It's kind of interesting. But there's the thing that happens with the cutscene lighting in this game, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, where I'm going to send this shot to Oliver. I think this is a great looking shot of the main character. I actually posted on Twitter the other day. But this is a good looking shot of the main character. It looks pretty lifelike and, all these other things. But if you look at this shot that I'm sending to Oliver right here, the second shot, I'm going to call it Uncanny Valley. And the reason for that actually has a lot to do with like the eye lighting. Where, for example, like with like usually in like standard broad daylight or even just this is an indoor shot, but like usually one thing is you can see the difference between the iris and the pupil very easily in people's eyes. You can see that there's like a difference in color and variation and also depth of lighting. So it gives you that sense. But here in this shot, you've kind of got like pinpoint specular on the eyes. And sorry, I'm complaining about something really minor here, but it gives it an uncanny valley effect, which is what I think a couple of people reacted to this trailer about. But basically, it's hard to differentiate between the pupil and the iris, and so it looks like the entire eye is like completely dark, and it gives them a very inhuman, like atavistic look, almost like something you'd see out of like a horror movie. And I think that was a little off-putting in a couple shots in the trailer. And I think it's mainly lighting driven because other shots don't have this issue. So it has to do something with the eye shading and the way it reacts to light. I don't know. But it gave off a couple of the main character shots looked a little awkward as a result of that. I think this game, I'm very excited to see how it looks. I love the design of a lot of Star Wars media, just the way the environments looks, and it seems to pick up on that. But I don't think it's going to be, for example, like Jedi Survivor, where like a huge part of the game is going to be watching a lot of really ridiculously good looking cutscenes. I think that's more like a back burner aspect of this. It's not so important. I think it's mainly going to be like the world stuff, which this trailer didn't show off nearly as much and as well as the first trailer did. So yeah, that's really all I had to say about that. I just wanted to comment a little about the uncanny valley effect that I got with the main character in this trailer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Oliver, thoughts?
Yeah, I had all the same thoughts, really. I think the story trailer isn't maybe the best way to show this game off, because the character rendering is like not as strong, and in certain lighting conditions you do get a little bit of that uncanny valley effect, especially in the main character. I think overall the character rendering is not quite up to the same level as a title like Jedi Survivor probably would be. I still think it looks really good, but it's just not quite up to that same level. And there are some issues with things like shadow aliasing, which hopefully the PC version will address to some degree. Maybe that's just an artifact of the console build. Maybe this is a console build where they're showing console-like settings. I think that's probably the case here. And then, yeah, for some reason there's like motion blur turned on and turned off, and that's a little bit strange. But I think overall the game looks really good. Anything that looks more like gameplay looks fantastic. Some of the panning shots look amazing. All the explosions, VFX, cities, that all looks amazing. I'd like to have seen more gameplay in line with that initial trailer, because I thought that looked fantastic. And the game in motion, I think, will be one of the more compelling titles this year. So, yeah, I just think it's a bit of a weird showcase for this game's visuals. I think like Avatar, really where it's going to look most compelling is in those gameplay sequences, and not as much in the cutscenes. Not to say the cutscenes look bad, but just that like the real appeal for me here is like seeing that beautiful open world with the RTGI, and I think the RT reflections as well. We can talk about that in a moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the appeal here, not so much like the canned cinematic sequences.
Agreed.
Okay, cool. Alex, do you think this is like, it is the same engine as Avatar? Are there any enhancements that you're seeing there over and above Avatar?
Via the trailer, no. Other than Avatar didn't really have a lot of hair rendering, other than like Na'vi ponytails and things like that. So the one thing we get to see on the main character, which is one of the less than stellar aspects, is like there is a bit of like movement in the hair and stuff when it moves around. It's not. It also reaches uncanny valley stuff, but and from a third person camera in a game like this, it's actually going to look good. The thing is, it doesn't look good magnified, I think, in the cutscenes, which is something Oliver just said. Like this, I don't think that's the game's strength in its visuals, and the video isn't doing a good way of showing that off. Another thing I want to talk about is that this is, and there's once again another NVIDIA blog about this, and we talked about this earlier, is this is going to be, unlike Avatar was AMD sponsored, this one's going to be NVIDIA sponsored, which I always generally just prefer, because there's a different kind of appreciation for PC exclusive features for NVIDIA sponsored games. Like that's how we get Cyberpunk patch racing. That's how we get Alan Wake, patch racing kind of stuff. And so here they're actually going to be implementing RTX DI, which will take care of one of my like pet peeves with Avatar, and I guess with this trailer too. And Oliver mentioned it. It was like shadow quality is not 100%, and it's one of the things that kind of lets it down visually versus other aspects of the game. And I think here RTX DI can do a lot of things in a Star Wars universe based game, arguably more than it could do in Avatar. There's a lot of like glowing neon. There's a lot of little point lights. There's a lot of emissive surfaces in Star Wars, just in general. And these like area light features, which games either have to fake or have them be shadowless. It could actually lead to scenes looking very, very different. More so, less ones in the broad daylight, but more so those in the kind of like nighttime indoor environments, which this game apparently has a number of shots of. So I'm very interested to see that, see what it does to the visuals on the PC version. A curious thing that I mentioned also, like the last time we talked about this game, is it currently doesn't have DLSS 3.5 ray reconstruction as a part of the announcement of its features, which is very curious. The game is going to support DLSS 3, unlike Avatar, which doesn't right now. And it's going to support FrameGen as a result of that. I think that's what it's implying. Yeah. But not having 3.5 ray reconstruction while using RTX DI is a curious decision. And I don't know why it is. We'll see when the game comes what that looks like. But I could imagine, given how much ray tracing there already is here, DLSS ray reconstruction could be actually a great boon to the game's visuals. So I'm curious about what that's all about. But there's still a good time between now and August for things to change. And maybe it'll include it, or maybe it won't.
Yeah, I'm still somewhat baffled by the lack of DLSS 3 frame generation in Avatar. When it has FSR 3. I mean, we're kind of going back to the, when this happens, there's always the suspicions that any particular sponsorship may be precluding features from the other vendors.
Always, yeah.
Being in there. And that sort of stood out a bit as being slightly weird and wrong. There's no real technical reason I can think of why you would have one and not the other. And you do have DLSS.
And when I look back at Alan Wake, or even, there's this kind of weird limbo thing going on right now with FSR 2.21 and 3 and 3.1, is that right now, if there was a period of time where if you wanted to integrate FSR 3, you knew, at least from AMD internally, if you were talking with them, that there's a newer version of FSR 3 coming down the way that is going to improve like fundamental things, like with the original Immortals of Aveum release and Forspoken, they're using like that like kind of beta-y version of FSR 3, which we had a lot of issues with. And if you were starting your integration then for FSR 3, you would know there was one in the future that would be supporting VRR. And if you started one now, you know there'd be one in the future that is also like agnostic of FSR 2. The FSR 3.1 version of FSR 3 FrameGen is going to allow you to use things like DLSS or TAA. So like, it's just like, I understand it a little bit on the AMD side of things, but DLSS 3 FrameGen right now is so like proven. And if you're already doing these like back-end legwork to get FrameGen in a game, the inputs are going to be pretty much the exact same for for DLSS 3. So I don't know why devs are not including it. I would still like to see stuff like Cyberpunk, though, updated to have FSR 3 FrameGen, though. I don't know why it hasn't, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And similarly, Star Wars Outlaws, you'd hope it has FSR 3 as well.
I hope it does, yeah.
There's no reason why it shouldn't. Anything to add, Oliver?
Yeah, on the technique side of things, I did take a look through this trailer with a bit of a fine-tooth comb, and I did see a couple shots that made me think of certain things. Like at 1 minute, 26 seconds in the trailer, this is a little bit, very freeze-framey, but if you look at the right-hand side of the screen there, the main character's body isn't visible in the reflection when the little animal is in front of her, but the box is. And then when she moves away, or when the little animal moves away, the full reflection of her comes into view. So I think that might suggest a similar RT reflections implementation to Avatar, where skinned objects aren't represented in the RT, but other parts of the world are. And you actually see some pretty obvious SSR in general. So I think that like that's more plausible. And then when you look at some of the reflections in various shots, like at 1 minute and like I think like around 2 minutes, 9 seconds, you see RT reflections, or what look like RT reflections to me, on bodies of water that look a lot like avatars. So that kind of makes me think of, they're doing something similar to Avatar, which is like, obviously that's the default assumption, but I do think that's the case here. And I'm assuming RTGI isn't here for a variety of reasons, like that shot at 22 seconds with the stormtroopers in the alley. It just looks really, really good. And I'm reminded a little bit of FF7 Rebirth, where it's like, if you don't have RT reflection or RTGI in a open world console game with like a lot of these complex environments and difficult geometry and whatnot, you actually end up with a game that's pretty hard to light. So just anytime I see a good looking open world game with consistent lighting, I'm always thinking like, could this be RTGI? Because otherwise it's tough to do, right?
Yeah, it's very tough. And you're reminding me of that. That's a really good point. Like on the console version and on all the way up to the ultra mode on PC, skinned objects are not included in the BVH. And they're done via screen space, either like SSGI or SS screen space reflections. And one thing that RTX DI, which, one thing it requires, kind of, and I'm curious to see what this means for the game, is it requires actually a very accurate BVH, because shadows and small shadows require accurate BVH for them to look good. And RTX DI is all about shadowing. So I'm curious if the RTX DI in this game, when you enable that path on PC, if it's going to use an entirely different BVH than like the traditional game, which, as I pointed out back then, is simplified in terms of geometry at times. On lower modes, it's missing things like skinned objects. Even when you turned it on the max setting, I noticed that the skinned objects that were there, they were the full quality of the full skinned character, but they were also like, I think they only updated at like one every sixth or one every fifth frame or something like that. So it was like, obviously, like, they were trying to save a lot on that BVH, even on the PC version at max settings. So what does this mean? Is this going to have like, it could be like a ridiculously heavy game actually with the RTX DI on, that means. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, Alex, Avatar had unobtainium settings,
right,
which was like a command line that activated proper ultra.
I'm fine with that, as I said.
I think what we need for this is like a Palpatine style unlimited power.
Unlimited. Please do that. Listen to
switch.
us. Unlimited power. Name it that. Something. What's another good Palpatine quote? I don't know. Something like
there's hundreds.
Unexpected. You know. So.
It could just be a good.
Good.
Anyway,
I'm excited.
Star Wars Outlaws. I mean, it is looking terrific, no doubt about it. Even with the various critiques, but I get what you're saying. The thing is, when you're pushing that hard, and you're seeing kind of what could be construed as almost low-hanging fruit, to just tiny tweaks that could make the difference, then absolutely. Let's move on to our next news story. Okay, so this week there was a big deal about the concept that Electronic Arts has essentially shuttered the idea of further Dead Space games. We had Dead Space Remake, obviously, which seemed to do pretty well, actually. And we now have confirmation that EA Motive, the developer behind it, isn't going to be producing a Dead Space 2 remake. And probably more sort of frustrating is the fact that there's going to be no new Dead Space games. I mean, forget the remake. The concept of having a brand new Dead Space, I think, would be absolutely compelling. And then the further news that Motive would be moving on to doing things like, becoming a Battlefield studio, which, is slightly disappointing. Oliver, thoughts about this one?
I think this is really unfortunate. Dead Space Remake was one of my favorite titles last year. I thought it was like super good, just a really confident and assured remake of an older game that wasn't afraid to change a lot of things actually, while keeping the spirit of the original very much intact. And I thought they just did a fantastic job with that remaster. That remake in every respect: the visuals, the gameplay design, the new environments, new areas, new quests, whatever. And I think a new Dead Space title could be really compelling, or even Dead Space 2. I think that would have been really interesting. But unfortunately, this is one of those titles that I kind of had my finger on over the last year, because it's one of those games where the publisher doesn't announce sales numbers, and then you get nervous. That's also actually a little bit of a worry of mine with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. They also haven't announced sales numbers for that, and that always makes me nervous. But the upside here, from my perspective, is that the first Dead Space game is very self-contained for the most part. It does kind of tee up a sequel at the end, but it's mostly a self-contained game that tells its own story. And the remake is still very, very good. It has big issues on PC, but on the consoles, it's mostly in good shape. Some minor traversal stutters. There's some frame rate dips towards the end of the game as you get more weapons and more enemies show up on screen, but it's pretty good. So I think the game is in good state, at least on the consoles, and I think it's still worth playing, well worth playing. I don't think there's any issues there, and I don't think the fact that you don't get that continuation of the story with new remakes, I don't think that's a big issue here. I would have just liked to have seen EA Motive work on new Dead Space titles rather than just being relegated to Battlefield studio status. And then whatever they're doing with Iron Man, which I'm sure will be interesting, but it's another superhero title, so maybe that's not everyone's cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we did have this sort of fertile period where it looked as though EA were actually embracing the concept of, revisiting great IP like this, but also doing new stuff as well. And so the concept that they're, basically doing Marvel and Battlefield stuff, it's a bit of a shame from my perspective, but I guess ultimately you've got to see the games themselves to see, what they're actually like. Alex?
Yeah, I'm of the same mind. Oliver already talked about the PC issues, so the one thing that little bit saddens me about that, I described it last year, but there's going to be no updates to the PC version forever as a result of a decision like this. So, I mean, I just loaded up on a 7800X 3D. I was going to post a very snarky comment on Twitter about it when I did, because I went to the one area and it's just like, it's like a massive 150 millisecond stutter followed by like a 66 millisecond one. And then I walked across the room and it did it again. It's like, oh my God, this is 7800X 3D. So it's going to take, like 15 years until the game runs at an actual smooth 60 FPS, maybe. We'll see. But that's the matter. That's the way this works.
I was about to say, Alex, when you post snarky tweets on Twitter, that always goes down well.
It always totally does.
With no repercussions whatsoever.
Never has ever had any issues. But yes, so that's a shame. I don't think there's a need for a Dead Space 2 remake. I think the first Dead Space 2 in its form is really good. It actually has a pretty competent, I thought the original Dead Space was fine on PC for 98% of it. And Dead Space 2 is even better. It has some of the same issues as Dead Space 1, but it's actually a pretty great PC version. And you can always still play that, and I'm pretty sure it's still... Is it still purchasable? I hope it is.
It's on Steam.
If it would have... then it's there. So, I mean, I don't see a big loss there. I just think it's more interesting when EA doesn't rely on these large IPs. I don't have any interest in Marvel. Battlefield lost me years ago. So unless the next Battlefield is very, very different in a lot of ways from what 2042 was, or even Battlefield 5 or even Battlefield 1, well then... Yeah. I would have just liked to see them. Maybe they had a little bit of. There's a bit of backlash internally at EA about the whole EA Originals program having some success for some games, like Jedi Survivor. I think is ridiculously successful for them, but then seeing stuff like Immortals of Aveum, which is less successful, and maybe this, which I don't think is an EA original, but it's still the single player mold game like the EA Originals are, which wasn't as successful. So I don't know, maybe they're learning all the wrong things, but if this is internal decisions by Motive themselves about what they want to do, then I think you should just let the developers do what they want to do. So
yeah, I mean, the initial report was about how Dead Space 2 remake had been cancelled, and then there was a rebuttal from EA saying, well, actually, there never was going to be a Dead Space 2 remake, and then there was sort of behind-the-scenes murmurings that it was, there were some ideas, but it never actually came to anything. So that's kind of like the various drama that kicked off this week. Battlefield 2042, though, I mean, people are enjoying it now. It seems to have turned around. And Oliver, thinking back actually to when it launched, you kind of liked it then.
That was one of my first videos, my third or fourth video, I think. Yeah, it was a good looking game. I still actually play it from time to time with my friends. It's still a fun multiplayer experience. Some of the areas they went in aren't so keen. I'm not so keen on, like the fact that you have 128 player matches. I kind of like smaller matches. I like 24 player matches, not 128 player matches. That's not my favorite. I do worry a little bit though, like when we look back at Visceral, which obviously they were the original Dead Space developers. They were moved to Battlefield status, and we all know what became of Visceral. So I hope that isn't the case with EA Motive, because they seem extremely talented. Their work on Dead Space Remake was fantastic. I thought that was just an amazing remake of a great title, and I would hate to see them flushed down the toilet at some point because they work on a new Battlefield game that maybe doesn't quite hit. Maybe EA decides to move away from Battlefield, and all of a sudden you have need for one less premier development studio. That'd be my concern. But I hope they do produce something interesting, and I hope this Iron Man game materializes in good form as well. So that doesn't need to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Iron Man's basically tailor-made for great video games,
right?
When you think about it, Okay, I guess that's all we've got to say about that one. Let's move on. Interesting news story that actually cropped up last week, but it didn't make it into the direct for some reason, despite me being the person that broke the news. Immortals of Aveum, we discussed it earlier. It is receiving FSR3 support on consoles. Now, we had some sort of mini announcement from Ascendant Studios that something was going to be happening in that regard, but we now have firm confirmation that it is actually happening for consoles, and it will be arriving in a few short weeks. Now, FSR3 doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get frame generation, right? Because the spatial upscaler has been rolled into that. But the developer has confirmed to us that yes, this will be the first console game to support FSR3 frame generation. And HDR support was recently added to Immortals of Aveum 2. Question is, well, what form is this going to take on the consoles? And obviously in the past, I've done some experiments using the old version of FSR3 on PC with console equivalent settings, console equivalent hardware rather, and came to the conclusion that you could probably do a high frame rate mode with it, but the idea of putting it up to 60 frames per second, you probably not a good idea, bearing in mind that FSR3 kind of needs a base 60 FPS to begin with. Mm-hmm. I guess the reaction to that, Alex, was basically, well, is this going to come with FSR 3.1 spatial upscaling enhancements as well? Because this was kind of like the main reaction that we had from that story, which was, okay, yeah, this is good, but there's a lot of issues with the FSR2 support in it already.
Right. Yeah, FSR2 didn't like that game's visuals, to say the least. Alvar's talked about it before in the past. Like, you can get a good with a high enough resolution internally and with an art style and a camera movement type. Like you talked about Scorn, where it was really hard to even see that it wasn't native 4K, right? Mm-hmm. And that game's dark. The camera isn't going wild. There isn't a lot of stuff just constantly like going in front of the screen and changing things like a third person character. But with Immortals of Aveum, it was like a faster paced first person shooter with like this giant arm on the screen, always like right here.
With bad motion vectors.
With bad motion vectors. So DLSS loved it, but FSR2 definitely did not love it. Yeah, so I'm curious, if it doesn't ship with that, it doesn't solve the core like image quality issue of the game, but it would make it run smoother.
Yeah, I think ultimately we will be looking at a high frame rate mode, because I don't really see any other utilization for the technology really in the console space. And to be fair, I think it could be quite effective, but I do agree that it really would stand to benefit from those FSR 3.1 improvements in terms of spatial upscaling, because there were some issues with Immortals of Aveum. And, typically the higher your frame rate, the better TAA looks and the better reconstruction looks, but it didn't really help Aveum, and frame generation doesn't help in that regard.
It's just FSR.
It would...
Yeah, FSR2 is just not good with particle effects, and especially like these semi-transparent like white particles that the game has. Like they're like colored like blue, green, red. I think there may be another color too, but maybe even yellow. But the whole point is like when they're like semi-transparent and they have like a white center. If you look at those, all those games that have FSR2 that have particle effects like this, like Forspoken also has this issue, is particle effects don't look good with FSR2. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that FSR 3.1 hasn't said if it's changing anything there. So I'm actually curious if it'll help in those aspects. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Oliver?
What I'll say here is that I've had no contact in particular with FSR3. I've not used it myself. But I would say that I don't necessarily agree with the priorities of the studio when it comes to balancing graphics and performance on Immortals of Aveum in its existing console outings, because the existing game does not run super well last time I checked on Series X and PS5, or at least it didn't as of a couple months ago. But Series S, amusingly, does run at 60 FPS the majority of the time. And
right.
I don't know what their frame rate target would be for an FSR3 update. Obviously, I think probably their language here suggests maybe it will be unlocked. Certainly based on existing PS5 and Series X performance, I think it could be unlocked because those titles often run unlocked as well. If Series S is included, I'd be very curious to see what that implementation looks like. But my kind of overall takeaway would be like, I don't think the game is configured very well in Series X and PS5 as it stands. I think the resolution should be lowered. I think the output resolution should certainly be lowered. I think those games would do well with a bit of like fine tuning to actually achieve that 60 FPS visual target, because we know it's very achievable. It's certainly achievable on a Series S, so why not on the higher end consoles? And I just don't like games in general that are making frame rate compromises in the name of image quality, where you're having an unlocked frame rate, especially on non-VR panels. I just don't think that's a satisfying experience.
Right. Right. I get what you're saying. The game launched with a very low resolution, but a more consistent frame rate. Then it was patched with DRS, and the DRS raised the threshold for the lower bounds, which lowered the frame rate. So, I agree. If you're going to be updating the game again with something as profound as frame generation, hopefully, if there is an FSR 3.1 implementation, they might feel the need to, again, tweak the resolution bounds and increase the base frame rate. And then you get the amplification factor of FSR 3 frame gen on top of that. But I think this does basically conclusively prove it's GPU limited, not CPU limited. And with frame gen, you typically get the highest multiplication factors when you're CPU limited. Mm-hmm. So, my gut feeling is that it's going to be a high refresh rate VRR mode, which could work quite well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Alex, I do have a question though. Do you know, so on PS5, obviously developers have visibility into this, but on Xbox, do developers even have visibility as to whether the game is using VRR or not?
I don't think so. And I think this was the reason why when we talked with Asobo about Microsoft Flight Simulator, they had to create some sort of like feedback loop when the game starts up to figure out whether or not VRR was on. And it's probably simple enough as is, but we've seen it so rarely utilized that I think it just is under the radar for a lot of developers. Yeah. Just like how 40 hertz modes are so under the radar and just not existing more or less on Xbox Series X, which is a shame.
Right.
They could exist, but they don't. A lot of developers don't do it.
Plague Tale is pretty much the only game on Xbox that I think has a 40 hertz balance mode, and it's a Asobo, right? So they know when the console is running at 120 hertz because they've done the legwork to figure it out, when really it should just be a system call. And I know the reason why Microsoft did that, and it's actually a good reason. There shouldn't be specific game modes that are limited to specific resolutions or refresh rates, right? But times have moved on now, and it does make sense for a developer to know what refresh rate the console is set to.
Yeah. If the system knows, that means the developer should also be able to know very, very easily. So
because we had that situation with PS4 Pro where certain game modes were only accessible if you had a 4K or 1080p TV, and
that was annoying.
Kind of a bit. That was a bit weird. But there's certainly reasons now to know why you should have whether the system is running in VRR mode or not, or 120
certainly
hertz
with frame gen. It's something where sometimes it works with VR, sometimes it doesn't. Obviously FSR 3 in its current incarnation on PC doesn't really seem to work well with VR, but here they're saying that's a requirement. So that's a little weird, but I mean, they should have visibility into it, because that's really where the future, I think, of graphics technology is going, is understanding what your display looks like and tailoring the experience to that rather than the other way around. It's my own personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, we had this supporter question from Greg Brown with, will the FSR 3 implementation in Immortals of Aveum have the same anti-ghosting improvements AMD recently showed off? Developers' blog post conspicuously only mentions that improvement coming to PC. You'd hope if it's coming, I mean, because this is what's happening, right? There's going to be, obviously Avium at the moment has the initial FSR 3 implementation, which it works with VSync, but doesn't have particularly good support. In fact, practically zero support for VRR and VSync off.
The current version.
And they're upgrading the FSR 3 on PC to support that. And if the PC version is getting the anti-ghosting improvements, you would hope that the console versions are getting them too, bearing in mind they should surely be running from the same version of FSR 3. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, the thing is, the developer tweeted that, hey, Digital Foundry is going to be taking a look at that. And yes, we've been speaking to Ascendant, so we can't wait to get access to the code to see what this actually looks like. And what can I say? Really looking forward to that. And doing some latency testing as well, because we don't quite know what the solution is there right now.
Yeah, that's another thing I'm working about on consoles, because on PC, at least on NVIDIA, you have reflex, and it's forced on when you use DLSS 3 and you're in a VRR scenario, which most users, literally 98% of them probably are using DLSS 3 in this way. So what the reflex is going to do is it does multiple things. Gives the GPU control over actually like the frame rate presentation through hardware accelerated, what is it called? HAGS, hardware accelerated. You know what it is. It's the option in Windows.
Yes.
HAGS. I always forget the name of it. But yeah, it gives that. Then another thing it does is it dynamically adjusts the frame rate cap to be below full GPU utilization and to be below refresh rate. So if it's on a 120 hertz screen, it'll drop it down to like 116, 117. Like it's like an in-between number there to prevent VSync queuing. But then it also prevents like back buffers coming into existence by not allowing the GPU to ever get full utilization when it's below the refresh rate. So if you're like, say you're like at 95 FPS or 95 FPS, it won't be 95 FPS because your GPU is tapping out at 100%. It's going to be 95 FPS because your GPU is at like 95%. And they try and do that too as another latency mitigation technique. Reflex is actually a very complex piece of tech. It's pretty cool. But on console, there's nothing like that comes standard. So I'm curious to see what this is going to look like. Because if it's all based upon just like, oh, if you hit 120 hertz, it is 120 hertz. It's not going to be latency mitigated 120 hertz. So it's going to be quite different feeling than something like DLSS 3. But once again, controllers, they're already very latency heavy devices in themselves, just with the way thumbsticks work. So who knows how that actually feels for the end user.
The good news is that Aveum is actually a really good game to use with the LDAT latency sensor. There's no reason, actually, depends whether there's mouse support on the consoles. Probably not. Probably have to use the high-speed camera method there. But we should be able to figure out what the latency implication of FSR 3 is. But it is quite interesting that, when DLSS 3 came out, it was all about, you're getting the amplification of frame rate, but it feels like a slower game. But that argument just seems to have sort of diminished over time to the point where FSR 3 games are arriving with no latency mitigation, but people are still using and enjoying the feature.
Yeah. It's totally weird how the discourse like immediately shifted. Like it was not even a quest. Like it was the biggest problem on Earth, even though there wasn't any good discussion about it. Like we never made the video that we kind of wanted to make about like what is latency actually about, because the research is every game has different latency, etc. Yeah. And then FSR 3 came out, and then people just started like injecting it into games. So they're like no latency mitigation whatsoever. They're just happy with it. So it's curious.
Yeah,
how does that happen? Yeah.
Well, funny that, isn't it? Anyway, that's the end of the news this week, and we're going to go immediately forth into supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where, every week I put up a call for questions on our Patreon, asking for input from our supporters, and you can do that too by joining our supporter program, patreon.com/digitalfoundry. Big bunch of questions, awesome ones as usual. We cherry pick the best, or rather the ones that we're best equipped to answer, but further questions may well be answered in our supporter only show, DF Indirect. And I think, Oliver, we're probably going to need to do one of those in the next couple of weeks, because those questions are building up. But let's crack on with the first question from Wide Boy Slim. The dream of PC graphics in the comfort of your living room with a controller has been a constant refrain for aging gamers. Have we reached the point where one can achieve the benefits of a top-tier PC with the convenience of a console? Would I still be mired in driver updates, shader stutter, endless Windows configuration, and a huge box stuck in my living room? I think the answer is yes, but I'm curious about your thoughts, Alex.
I mean, well, when I complained as a power user about, so shader compilation stutter is actually an endemic issue on PC, which is why I make such a big deal about it. But the other Windows things that the user mentions, I don't think there is such a big deal. Like, I usually, when I use the Ryzen 5 3600 PC, or even the 12, sorry, it used to be 1200, 7800 X3D PC, they're just like kept in like a very default state, and they are really plug and play. They are very easy to use. With my workstation PC, it's a lot less that, because I'm doing a lot more with it. But I think for most casual users, actually, I don't think a lot of casual users even update their drivers often, and they play games still, and they only update them when there's an issue. So I don't think it's not like Windows 98, or, you know, it's not like any of these things. I don't think that's such a big issue, but I don't think the next box or whatever, I don't think there's going to be a bridging of these PCs and Xboxes, what is my hope is, but I think they're going to try and take away some of the aspects that make PC gaming a little bit more a little bit more cumbersome, if they're going to be doing this. Yeah.
Oliver, it occurs to me that if they're solving this problem on a handheld, and the idea is that your Legion Go or ROG Ally becomes an Xbox, then that work would carry through to any PC, right?
I'd certainly hope so. That certainly seems like the most likely scenario, especially when these devices, they don't have touchpads, but they do have touch screens. So that helps you out a lot when you have these edge cases. And I'm always thinking about the edge cases with Windows, because it might be true that you have a seamless experience 90% of the way there, and then that remaining 10% involves some Windows cruft, some older titles. And now all of a sudden we're back to like, okay, how do I navigate this thing with an Xbox Series pad? It's not going to work out very well. So I think that's my main concern. And personally, like, I do play a lot of PC games on the couch. I don't really play as much in a desk setup. And that's the main thing that I'm annoyed by. You still have to deal with the PC's input problems. I don't mind driver updates as much. I don't mind, like, obviously shader comp is just something that's inherent to the platform at this point. It's more just like the input issues. And I do have a hybrid keyboard touchpad, little wireless keyboard thing that I use. Those are a little clunky, but they do help you in these edge cases. Steam's big picture mode does help a lot as well. But again, you just run into like these edge cases. It could be like 5% of the time you have to use cursor input, or 5% of the time you need keyboard input. But when you do need it, you kind of need all of a sudden to swap this whole different computing paradigm. And unfortunately, I don't really have a whole lot of confidence in Microsoft's ability to ferret out all of those edge cases. I think maybe the smarter thing would just be to have some hardware accommodation or some very clever software accommodation for the edge cases than trying to steer around all of them, because I think you're always going to run into them to some degree, and that's my concern, right? At the moment, that's certainly the case.
Yeah, like, you know, when you have a GPU upgrade, you get a prompt from the software which kind of requires response from a mouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do need something like, I mean, you could map the mouse controls to like the right analog stick.
That's so bad.
Which is
I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, I think there's got to be another way. Maybe it's a new controller type. Maybe you know, like the Steam controller had the touchpads. You know,
Deck has it, of course.
Deck has those two. Those are reasonable. I think those are actually reasonable mouse, like, flicking cursor things. Another thing that I just thought about regarding this question is that there's nothing preventing Microsoft from coming out with a new version of Windows that is more custom tailored toward gaming.
Right.
That perhaps does not have full Windows. Well, maybe it offers them, like, as kind of like how Steam does. Steam big picture mode. Steam Deck has, where you can go out to the Linux desktop. Maybe there is actually a way for Microsoft to do that, and it could actually become installable not just to whatever their future Xbox is, but it could also be installable to any PC, like what Rich just said, which would be an interesting future indeed. I think I would probably, for a workstation PC, I would use like a full Windows, but I wouldn't really have any problem for like a PC that is only used for gaming to have a more limited or different OS depending upon how I use it. So, yeah.
I think Oliver's right. There's edge cases, and then I think, you know, you should be able to come up with solutions that address the majority of those ones. Stuff like Windows updates, stuff like graphics card driver updates. I mean, all of that sort of stuff is taken care of on a console through a system software update that well, it's not good for a PC, but that actually stops you using the console until you get the update done.
Yeah, on a PC that'd be unfathomable. I mean,
yes,
it would be awful.
Yeah, I'd almost think like sort of like a touch, a tab kind of interface, like cycling through the various options. Press A to accept, press B to decline. Like you could probably go a pretty far ways just with that kind of like extra software layer on top of Windows. That could maybe get you through a lot of those edge cases, and then maybe for the remainder, you would have to click the thumbsticks in and use the touchpad, or use the thumbstick as a cursor, or something really clunky, horribly clunky. But maybe they could get rid of most of those issues, and it wouldn't be such a concern.
Yeah, so I mean, there are many refrains from aging gamers, as White Boy Slim puts it. One of his ones is a huge box stuck in my living room. I mean, that is basically the nature of the beast in terms of a components-based design. But you can make smaller console-like PCs.
Yeah.
You just have to be more cognizant of the fact that you're probably not going to be putting a 4090 in there.
Exactly. And I think there's also, Microsoft has enough leeway, in terms of ATX and things like that. They could pioneer another motherboard standard. Microsoft has the power to do that.
Right.
They could also, they really do have the power to do that. And I could imagine a next, like if there's this breakout into a PC like Xbox, that it would have maybe another motherboard standard, or maybe multiple, because there could be different configurations of these things, like small Xboxes and big Xboxes. I think there's a lot that could be done here, just because Microsoft is so big and powerful and has a lot of money. It's just a matter of how much money will they get out of this in return.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Ben Fisher. No greeting here. PS5 Pro again. The CPU increases are quite modest, and it's been said on the podcast that it's not going to magically open up 60 FPS in CPU limited games that are currently 30. What about 40 FPS? Do you see developers / Sony adding more 40 FPS modes to Pro enhanced titles, games? Oliver, what do you think? I'm just trying to do the maths in my head here. 10%. I mean, the gulf between a 25 millisecond and a 16 millisecond frame time isn't really bridged by 10%. You're going to need overhead left over on the base PS5 game, I would have imagined.
Yes. I think 40 FPS is more of a possibility, but I would say that if you have a game that is strictly CPU limited, much of the time, like Dragon's Dogma 2, for instance, a 10% performance bump on the CPU, a 10% clock bump on the CPU is not going to get you a 33% boost to performance, which is what you need to go from 30 to 40. But I would say that if you have a game that's already pretty close to 40 FPS, it might do it. But I would kind of think that the more plausible thing would basically be a developer that can hit their image quality targets with 40 FPS in a PS5 Pro, couldn't do it on a PS5, but doesn't have that CPU overhead to go all the way to 60 with like PSSR and really pushing up that image quality boat a little bit, bringing it in a little bit rather, to hit a higher frame rate. That's what I would kind of think of, is not so much the CPU is enabling it, but rather the GPU is enabling it, or at least the CPU is only getting them like that little bit over the line and not really helping them traverse this massive gulf that there is between 30 and 40 when it comes to these very CPU limited games, which is what we see in titles like Dragon's Dogma 2.
Alex?
Same response. I don't think it's enough, but I think it could lead to a PS. Like, I think this box is anyways is going to be targeting these power users. If that is targeting the hardcore user. Power user is not, it's a console, like targeting the hardcore user who is really invested in the ecosystem and who is excited about things like 40 FPS modes. So I think that's one thing that they've pushed already on PS5 that is a differentiating factor between them and Xbox, these 40 FPS modes. And so I'd expect even more of them in the future, and those they'll probably, I think they'll be there on PS5 though too, if they're there already. Yeah.
I think it's fair to point out that basically nobody except Sony and Asobo Studio is doing 40 FPS modes by the look of it. Have I missed anyone out?
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head, quite honestly.
Yeah, a 10% bump to CPU power won't really make too much difference, but it will increase stability on those 40 FPS modes. And if you're at like 120 hertz LFC mode, good thing. But we're kind of approaching niches here. But then again, the PlayStation 5 Pro may well be a niche product based on the specification bumps we're getting. We just don't really know at the moment. Generally, I'd like to see more 40 FPS modes, but it does seem to be that they're kind of like value adds. They're not really built in the kind of way you'd expect. And it is only Sony that's really taking that particularly seriously. Don't really have too much more to say about that. I mean, we do need to learn more about the PS5 Pro because, obviously we've seen the developer disclosures, but maybe things will come more into focus once we actually see some games and once we actually see some demos, as they did with PS4 Pro, which back in the day, it didn't really seem to make that much sense, but kind of did once you actually saw it. And maybe there's more to this than all meets the eye. But I guess with that, we should move on to our next question. This one from Jose Francisco Rosado. Hello, DF team. Many thanks for such amazing content. Regarding FSR 3 on consoles or even PC, I cannot accept a future where half the frames on my TV aren't quote-unquote real. Devs are relying too much on this reconstruction and frame gen tech to a point where it will be pretty hard to distinguish raw graphics engine and hardware power from this AI stuff. I prefer a 30 FPS game that makes me wonder how they achieve such a beautiful picture. Hellblade 2, he's cited as an example here, rather than simply saying, quote unquote, oh yeah, they use FSR/DLSS. So we hear this one a lot, don't we, Alex? And it's interesting because, fake frames, it's being sort of touted as being, not great, fake. But fundamentally, in rendering, everything is faked.
Yeah, it's all... Oliver, get that beep out. It's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. Like that Hellblade footage that you are fawning over, it's also so many smoke and mirrors. Do you think is this real geometry? I don't know. Like it's so many smoke and mirrors. Like nanite is an approximation of reality, of real things. Material properties in games are just a complete, Lumen is nowhere near path tracing. It's nowhere near bidirectional path tracing.
2D alpha everywhere.
Yeah, alpha is all BS. It's all like the most coarse approximation that on an aggregate scale with a lot of artist work and programmer, tricks gets to looking like something that we start to see as reality. And this is another one of those tricks. And especially with the Hellblade demo where Oliver talked about the internal resolution and like they're even making compromises in terms of like alpha resolution there that are even further. Like it's already not native resolution and the things in the game are already not native, and they've always never been native in most games, especially console ones. PC versions on their ultra settings might have thrown up things to like unreasonable resolutions, but that is an entirely different thing. And I don't think it matters. And especially when you're talking about 30 FPS, I don't think people are going to be using frame generation for 30 FPS experiences anyway. So it doesn't really affect that experience. But for people who want to have like a higher than 60 FPS experience, these things are just like even more important. These things like upscaling, reconstruction, frame gen. So I do not see this. I do not, this is not my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. Oliver?
I completely echo what Alex said. I would suggest that none of the frames that you're seeing on a console title are real in some deep sense. And, I sort of think that everything in real-time rendering is like fake or a hack. And there are already so many optimizations that you make relative to what would be seen as like anything close to a ground truth representation of reality. When you look at any modern game, there are just like so many. I mean, we don't point them out in like every video because our our standard isn't like the highest end CG imaginable when it comes to evaluating these game graphics. But there are obviously so many shortcuts, so many performance spring optimizations that, are not really true to reality. And we just accept it because we understand that you need to render in a 33 millisecond frame budget at the most generous. So yeah, I just think the fixation on like what's real and what's fake is ultimately not helpful for the industry, ultimately not helpful for evaluating graphics rendering. And I think really we should be focused more on what the output looks like and saying like, oh, this is a good output. When we have frame gen, when we have temporal upscaling, maybe that's a good output. We don't need to be so fixated on how the sausage gets made, unless you're us, of course. But like, I don't think the end consumer should be too fixated on that, really.
Ultimately, we're dealing with, every PC has got a limit, right? So it's about finding, everything needs to be budgeted. You can't just give a game an infinite budget to render stuff. And because it doesn't have that infinite budget, there are constraints, there are optimizations. There is what you might call fakery in terms of presenting a good image. And, FSR, DLSS, whether it's spatial upscaling or temporal, like frame generation, those are just additional tools that, make the kind of visuals you see in Hellblade 2 possible. I don't think if it was running at native resolution, it would look as good as what you're seeing in the final output there. And, the stuff that we just talked about there, like, Hellblade does still have a lot of compromises, like the lower resolution transparencies, particles, etc. This is stuff that's been happening in games, like, for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
It's just good practice to sort of nip and tuck at the quality of the presentation in order to increase performance. And I do kind of get the idea that this is sort of adjacent to the using upscaling as a crutch argument, which, maybe for The Last of Us Part 1, but, elsewhere, certainly in Hellblade 2, stuff like reconstruction is being used to enable new experiences, and you wouldn't really be seeing them like that otherwise. So, yeah, I really wouldn't be fixated on what's real and what's fake. The question is how good the fakery is and whether it's a convincing and pleasing presentation, and that's kind of the grounds for critique, I think, which I think was Oliver's point and Alex's, and is therefore mine as well. So let's move on to the next question. This one from Sven Darling. Hi Alex, exclamation point. Is there a risk that RT is losing traction? I see many worrying signs. Many Unreal Engine 5 games opting for software lumen, still ray tracing, by the way. CDP are discontinuing the Red Engine, which is arguably one of the best RT/PT implementations. NVIDIA focusing on AI and not committing resources to implement high-end RT features in games like Cyberpunk. No RT in Atomic Heart. RTGI in Forza Motorsport still not released, etc. Maybe the limited RT capabilities of consoles are the culprit, and hopefully PS5 Pro will help. The problem is that many gamers have the opinion that games look quote unquote good enough without RT, often citing games with baked lighting without understanding the difference between real-time lighting and baked lighting.
Right.
Lighting, yes. This one should be fairly easy to dispatch, so have at it.
Yeah, so I don't think there is any large trend to have what you just said about the PS5 Pro, for example, is a good counter argument to a supposed trend where Sony is going to be there. That's going to be the advertising angle. That's going to be what they're telling developers, at least, that you can add more hardware RT. When they're talking about stuff like a game having RT shadows, they aren't talking about like software RT shadows. They're talking about hardware RT shadows. And then you can add things like hardware RT reflections. We don't see any, like the industry, I don't think so at all. And I don't think there's been a reduction in the implementations of like hardcore ray tracing. Over time, it's increased. The few games that you list there, Forza Motorsport has had, apparently, from my outside view, with no internal knowledge, some sort of trouble development, where the things that it has promised, it has not released. I wouldn't use that as an example for anything. With regard to games shipping only software lumen is a good enough approximation to do certain types of game types. I would vastly prefer hardware just because the fidelity increases, but I won't yell at every single developer out there who doesn't release a hardware lumen version of a game. And things like the current version of hardware lumen, yes, it is not so performant, especially on consoles, but things are changing in UE land at the moment. UE 5.4 is apparently going to be much more CPU efficient and going to have a better hardware RT implementation. Things like work graphs on PC are also going to increase essentially the performance of things like hardware RT in Lumen, or just generally increase the performance of UE Unreal Engine, and they've already started demoing these things. So if anything, the entire industry is moving actually pretty just further in this direction. And as soon as Intel releases Battlemage, and as soon as NVIDIA's Blackwell comes out, whatever that's going to be called, RTX 5090, 5080, we're going to see even more pushes for hardware RT. And there's nothing wrong with software RT in general. I like back in the day, I loved Svogi. I thought it was cool. There's nothing wrong with a game not using hardware RT and using software RT. It's more like if the engine already supports it, it's a nice option to add for users, which is why I talk about it. But yeah, I don't see this trend at all.
Okay, Oliver?
Yeah, I actually think that, like, if anything, we're seeing the opposite of it, especially when you look at a lot of upcoming games like Black Myth Wukong and like the aforementioned Star Wars Outlaws, where, they do have heavily ray traced lighting. They're doing RTGI, they're doing RTXDI, they're doing RT reflections, maybe they're doing RT caustics. Like, they're already doing so much ray tracing with respect to their lighting that it is kind of a bit of a ray tracing showcase. And if anything, like, we're seeing a lot of developers begin to just depend on RT to just handle their lighting. So I'd suggest if anything, it's the opposite. But I'd also suggest maybe it's an artifact to the fact that for some upcoming games, we're in a stage of the promotional cycle where maybe the developers aren't talking about that. Who knows? Maybe for Marvel 1943, maybe they got some like bespoke path tracing in there. We just don't know yet because that game is like a year out at least, probably at this point, a year and a half out perhaps.
Right.
And at some point they will discuss that. They will disclose that. Certainly, like when you go back to like Alan Wake 2, they weren't disclosing the fact that they had a path traced renderer in there at the release, or rather at the reveal date of that title. It was later down the line. So I think we are going to see more of that down the line, not less. And I wouldn't particularly worry about the fact that we haven't seen like a ton of announcements, because I think those will eventually come, especially as like developers get to grips with new hardware, more powerful PC GPUs. I imagine it will happen.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there's an interesting concept here, that the idea that using ray tracing is taking too much performance out of the box, therefore it might be losing, momentum. It's kind of an argument that doesn't really make sense, because, if you look at most of the Unreal Engine 5 games out there, they could be running on Unreal Engine 4. Immortals of Aveum looks great, but the fundamental concept of Immortals of Aveum could work on Unreal Engine 4 or any other engine, basically. It's just that developers want to embrace the state of the art, and that comes with a performance cost, whether it's ray tracing, whether it's nanite, whether it's virtual shadow maps. So more holistically, developers are looking to make more advanced looking games, and they're embracing these features. And we've highlighted that software lumen has been used prolifically in Unreal Engine 5, but it's just part of the process, right? It's just part of the move onto a new engine. I'm sure it will get there. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Mm-hmm. Losing momentum, though, I guess Alan Wake shipped on console without hardware accelerated ray tracing, but it was still there in PC. Obviously there is a bit of a divide forming, because we now have PC parts in the mainstream that are actually quite good at ray tracing, very good, a lot better than the consoles. So there is that divide. But the point is that the overall direction of travel is towards more advanced features. We are seeing the transition from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5. And it's not just ray tracing that's part of that. It's just a general trend upwards. So, yeah, I don't really see it losing traction. Obviously, we've had games like Avatar coming out where it's all baked in. Marvel Spider-Man 2, where they basically removed the non-RT path because it just wasn't really needed anymore. I think basically cross-gen just slowed things down a lot more. And of course, there's the fact that Unreal Engine 5 took years to develop, and only, in the last year have we started to see titles actually emerge, even though it was showcased in 2020 alongside the reveal of the PlayStation 5. So yeah, bit of patience, I think, but we are getting there. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Dave_Ramos. I think the O in Ramos may actually be a 0 there, which is
nice.
Nice, yes. Hola, gents! Exclamation points. Given the APU advancements AMD has made since the PS5 and the Xbox Series consoles were launched, is it possible, feasible, doable for Xbox to launch a handheld with a modern AMD APU that can either emulate or match the performance of an Xbox Series S? This way, Xbox could release a handheld this holiday season that merely replaces the Series S and still launch a proper next-gen handheld when the next-gen eventually arrives. Can we have both our cake and eat it too? Or am I just serving myself a savoury slice of hopium? Good day, gents! Exclamation point. Oliver, you spend a good deal of time with your ROG ally, so what do you think about this one?
I think it is a bit of a slice of hopium. I think it would be too power hungry.
Sweet or savory?
Yeah,
I guess savory. Slice of hopium sounds more sweet to me, but maybe it's savory. When you look at like RDNA 3 on 5 nanometers, it's not that much more efficient than RDNA 2 on 6 or 7, which makes me think that this wouldn't be that compelling from a power consumption perspective if they did like a 5 nanometer APU, which is currently what's on the table for AMD APUs. I think it would take one more shrink or two more shrinks, really. Even 3 nanometers, I'm not sure if that would do it. I kind of doubt it because, I don't know, the 3 nanometer process, when you look at like the Apple A17 Pro, it didn't really do much for Apple. So I'm kind of wondering if it's just suffering some issues with leakage and whatnot that we see with some of these new processes that come online, especially without like the gate all-around transistor design or whatever they're going to be debuting for, I think, 2 nanometers. So I would tend to think that it's probably outside the question for a device that's releasing like this holiday season. But, down the line, I'm sure we'll see something that can match that performance spec, but I just don't think it'll be that soon.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree. If you look at what the Series S power consumption is, it's like, it's significant. It's like 80 to 100 watts system-wide. And, a shrink will get you, let's be extremely generous about it. Let's say that each shrink halves power consumption. You're going to need 2 shrinks to get that down to like 20 watts, which is still arguably too high. But you're not going to be getting halving of power consumption each shrink. So I think it's quite a way down the road. There are different ways to approach the problem. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, I still think, stuff like ROG Ally is... you have to reduce resolution and reduce frame rate to get those games playable. And, that has had the benefit of a major process shrink versus the 7 nanometer in the Series S.
Right.
So I think it's going to be some time before you can do that, just from a power consumption perspective. And 20 CUs, I think that's got the Series S. Getting that down into a manageable mobile form factor, I think that's quite a significant undertaking as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of hopium, and it's not going to be sweet.
I think of converging technologies here, just because I'm thinking about Switch 2, where instead of if it wouldn't be like the exact same, but maybe what if it's smaller, has less CUs, but it runs Series S profile games, but instead maybe use AI upscaling. So it's spending its power to get that maybe a certain resolution, not with generic compute, which is like more power hungry, but it's using fixed function hardware to help out that performance, that power draining performance there. I don't know, but yeah, like I'm all of your mind here. I think this is pretty it's unrealistic for the next 2 years, probably.
Yeah, I think the other thing to bear in mind is that you don't really need Series S quality on a 6-inch screen, to be brutally frank. I mean,
No, you don't.
No, that's the reason why I think the Switch 2 is going to do really, really well, because it's basically everything will be built up for that particular form factor. And you kind of see it borne out on the handhelds that we're seeing in the PC space. You can get away with outrageous things that you would never do for a desktop monitor or a TV. And it still works. It still looks pretty decent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just think, handhelds are designed specifically with efficiency in mind, getting the job done with various nips and tucks that suit that particular form factor. I don't think you need to be targeting parity with Xbox Series S.
Yeah.
Anything extra to add to that, Oliver?
I think you can already get a lot closer to that if you just change your display target from 4K to 720p. That gives you a lot, or even 1080p. Now, we're not talking about strictly like running Series S software at the same quality level, obviously. But if you are decreasing that target resolution, all of a sudden you do open yourself up to the possibility that something like a 7840U could deliver a Series S class experience in a game like Starfield, for instance. You can run that at roughly FPS, Series S quality settings at 1080p with FSR2 performance mode. It looks great on a ROG Ally at 30 FPS. That's a very satisfying experience. Now, is it the same as Series S? No. But is it a great visual experience that will hold up well compared to a Series S? Certainly when considering the difference in screen size between those two devices. Absolutely. I think so.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to give you an asset that I'm working on at the moment for my current project, which is looking at handhelds. I was sharing some shots with the team on the Slack channel yesterday. But this is Alan Wake 2 running on a 1X player, 7840U based machine, 25 watts, and we can match the settings, right, but lower the resolution. So performance mode, PlayStation 5, Alan Wake 2, that is FSR2 balance mode upscaling to 1440p, and we're doing the same thing with various FSR2 quality levels on the handheld, but going up to 720p. And you can see, I think, in the based on like for like balanced mode versus balanced mode, you're only getting 54% of the performance of the PS5, even though you're using upscaling, and even though we're at 720p. However, what I did next was to compare the performance mode settings on the handheld with that resolution downgrade versus the quality mode on PlayStation 5, which is upscaling to 4K. And you can see that actually now we're producing very similar performance to the PlayStation 5 version. And yes, there are quality downgrades, but you probably wouldn't notice them on a handheld screen. So yeah, I mean, the point is you can still play Alan Wake 2 on a handheld. Power hungry in the here and now, but maybe not in the future. But yes, that's that. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Dajar Ko. It's extremely long, but let's get to it. Happy half fortnight, gents. This week, Sarah Bond has doubled down on her claims by saying, quote unquote, we are moving full speed ahead on our next gen hardware, focusing on delivering the biggest technological leap ever in a generation. Could you define and quantify which current biggest technological leap they would be usurping? And which is, I think, the first time that word has ever been used on DF Direct. And what that would mean in the two possible scenarios, pure hardware performance versus hardware plus AI software enhancements. I think they might find the latter harder to argue/market, so defining both definitions would be interesting. Also, do they mean when comparing the individual leaps within console manufacturers or across comparing across manufacturers? For instance, going from PlayStation to 6.2 teraflops to Xbox 360 PlayStation 2 6.2 gigaflops to Xbox 360's 240 gigaflops would be a 38.7-fold increase. Even if you compare PS2 to PS3 within one manufacturer, it's 37.2x. I have a sneaking suspicion they might use the Series S as the comparator, but it would still be outlandish, e.g. 4 teraflops times 40 equals 160 teraflops. So even the weaker form of the hardware claim seems very unlikely. Thoughts, Foundryman? Is this just a big AI blag? Yeah, I think, basically the concept of having, quote unquote, the biggest technological leap ever in a generation, it can mean anything, and it doesn't necessarily mean teraflops. But, even with teraflops, we've seen stuff like dual issue FP32 used to inflate that particular metric. So, there's talks of PS5 Pro having 33 teraflops versus PS5's 10 teraflops, even though they're also saying it's only 45% extra GPU performance. So I think you've got to look at this more holistically as what defines a technological leap. And, I will be interested to see how they define it and what the comparator actually is. But I do think it is ultimately what we're seeing in AI space right now. And, Cyberpunk 2077 path tracing, 1 in 8 pixels is being natively rendered. And the rest is being done via spatial and temporal AI-based upscaling, right? I'd still consider that to be a fantastic technological leap, but it's not done in the traditional sense. And as we've seen with PS5 Pro, the concept of what is the traditional sense doesn't really make sense anymore anyway. Mm-hmm. Alex,
yeah, I
try
think
and get your head around that extremely long question.
Oliver mentioned it earlier about Phil Spencer busting out the 5090 or the 6090 and saying this is an Xbox, and then he holds up a Legion Go and he says this is an Xbox. So there's that opportunity for the future where it is actually ridiculously, but because the hardware is more expensive, the specific hardware they're talking about. But also I think the more realistic option as a part of that is that it's going to be about AI performance, and that you can have quite a large leap, larger than the PS2 to the Xbox 360 though. Or even PS1 to PS2.
PS1 to PS2 is basically the leap, right? Because it happened everywhere. We had N64 to GameCube,
which was also
PS1
ridiculous.
to PS2.
Yeah.
I mean, the leap there was genuinely astonishing. I'd be fascinated to see if you could get anything like that again. But it wouldn't apply to Xbox because they weren't in the PS1 generation. But then again, Sarah Bond is saying delivering the biggest technological leap ever in a generation.
I don't know. I don't know. It's all marketing. So I'm willing to bet it is actually like a specific thing. And maybe if they really want to annoy us, maybe it's actually about it's a cloud console too. You have the power of every Microsoft Azure server in the palm of your hand.
Yeah, until the internet Legion goes down.
Right here. Yeah. So maybe it's that. I don't know.
Whatever.
I agree completely with what's been said to this point, but I think, focusing on teraflops, it's the wrong metric to look at. Open your mind to the possibilities of AI, I suppose. Think about what it could do for gameplay and rendering, and just let your mind go and just imagine where we'll be in 4 or 5 years and just say, well, that'll be in the next Xbox. I suppose that's what we're supposed to do here. Mm-hmm. I don't think the teraflops number will come close to what you're suggesting, a 40 times increase. That's obviously would be extremely intense.
You could have a quad issue FB32.
Yeah, so useless.
Just keep on doubling.
Well, if we want to start fiddling with numbers, why don't we start talking about like int 4 or something, int 8? Tops. You could certainly, we could certainly have 400, 800 trillion operations per second, integer operations per second. I mean, it's a possibility. But I could also just see because I think maybe Microsoft's current approach on PC is instructive, where they're establishing a baseline for what AI powered PCs are, which I think they say it's 40 tops roughly for an NPU unit, low power NPU unit to achieve 40 tops. So I think here they could basically be saying here's our baseline for, tops performance, and achieve that. And then that's part of the Xbox's future spec. I think there are a lot of ways they could go with it, but I would not look at the teraflop number at all. I just put that out of your head. It's just not the number to look at anymore. Just not.
We've spoken about this in the past, where there is this kind of issue where on the one hand you're saying, hey, we're going to have this fantastic handheld, and then on the other side you're saying, hey, we're going to be delivering the greatest technological leap that's ever been seen. And it doesn't really make sense unless there's some other external factor we're not considering. And maybe it is, AI cloud, but that brings with it its own range of issues, specifically what happens when your internet connection goes down. And there's only, that there is still relatively massive latency talking to the cloud than there is doing it all on chip. So I do believe that if there is going to be the biggest technological leap ever in a generation, it's going to be a more holistic thing. But I do think they've got to prove it out. And I'm not sure that would have been the way I would have touted my next generation console, unless there is absolute confidence in the quality of what they're going to be putting out and they're able to back it up with actual demonstrations. Yeah. I don't really see, I'm still sort of mystified by all of that. I guess there was a need for Microsoft to double down by saying, yes, we're not going to be departing the hardware space. We're going to be, we're all in on Gen 10 and it's going to be great. I am fascinated by the confidence that must be there to produce this statement that they're delivering the biggest technological leap ever in a generation. But it is vague enough where it could actually mean anything. You just have to basically back it up with demos and software and games that actually deliver on that, while at the same time making those games playable on a ROG Ally-like device baffles me.
So what if there's a demo, and this is cheap in terms of like actually proving this, but what if there's a demo of a game like this? This is totally I don't think this is going to happen. Maybe it will. But what if there's a demo of a game, like say it's like a patch trace game and it's running on like something that has like ML based upscaling and ML based frame generation and maybe ML based like denoising. And it's running that on the future Xbox, but alongside it is the same code, ML based, everything with patch tracing running on the Xbox Series X at like 1 FPS.
Yeah, that would be doable. But
that would be a doable way to say literally 1 FPS versus 60 or 120, for example. It'd be ridiculous, but it'd be cheap because it's not, you wouldn't run that for the. In the first
you
place
can run Path Trace Cyberpunk at like literally, I think, at 2 FPS on a Steam Deck if you want to.
Yeah, I know. So like this is the thing. Like there's ways to demo this that they're not fair, but they prove a point. So it could be that.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe if you had like Cyberpunk running on Xbox One and then Cyberpunk running path traced, that would be a statement of the biggest technological leap ever made.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just really interested. I mean, the gauntlet's thrown down here at this point. Microsoft need to prove what they're saying, and who knows when that'll actually happen, because obviously everybody's looking to 2026 now for this console, but that was only ever hearsay, and maybe it'll be 2028. So, who knows? Wow. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. Very professional Dodo asks, hey there, gents. I come to you with a controversial question. Currently finishing Final Fantasy 16, and I'm struck with how consistently beautiful everything is. This is clearly a game made with 30 FPS in mind, and I feel they got a lot of juice out of 33 milliseconds. Should we be quote-unquote happy for games that target 30 FPS, since that would mean we are now reaching the era where current gen is really being pushed hard? Cross-gen games that run at 60 are great and all, but maybe we should be thankful that we're now getting experiences that could only run on a PS5 or Xbox Series consoles. Curious to hear your thoughts! I think we've made our thoughts on this one pretty clear in the past, but I guess the latest example's Hellblade 2, Oliver, which you took a close look at.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you think it could be run out of 60? Do you think it's actually a good example of a game that does run at 30 and we should be grateful for it?
Hellblade 2, I think it's just a question of what the CPU side of things looks like. If it can actually, if it's not so bound by single-threaded performance that it could run at 60 FPS on what is effectively a cut-down Ryzen 5 3600. If so, then of course 60 FPS could be a possibility. I think there'd be some question about whether it would be worthwhile from an image quality perspective. given that the game does seem reasonably heavy, like a lot of other UE5 titles. Maybe it wouldn't look so good. It might be okay in the Series X, but certainly in the Series S it wouldn't be very good, I couldn't imagine. I do think with the power of these consoles that achieving 60 FPS in a lot of titles should be achievable, and I think it should be the kind of thing that should be the standard still. That's still my expectation. But I think if you're pushing the state of the art, that 30 FPS should always be a possibility, and that might be better suited to certain game types over others. And I also just think it opens up more possibilities in the PC because you have a 30 FPS console title like Hellblade 2 on the PC. Again, presuming CPU performance isn't a huge problem, it should be possible to push it to high frame rates on PC. You get better image quality, you get various enhancements over that base game, whereas if it was targeting 60 FPS on consoles, the PC enhancements might not be quite as convincing, and the PC version might not be quite as compelling when pushed to the limit on a high-end PC. So I always think there's room for 30 FPS titles, and I do think to some degree it does indicate the end of cross-gen, because 60 FPS was a little bit of a marker of titles that maybe were not so ambitious on the CPU side of things in particular, which we did see with a lot of cross-gen titles.
Right.
Alex?
I agree with everything Oliver just said. And yeah, I think it is being happy. I mean, I don't know if you should be happy about it, but it's just a marking of the times. I look at that Marvel. It's not 1940. What year is it?
1943.
Yeah, Marvel 1943. I don't see that running at 60 FPS based on that little presentation. I mean, it's just a cinematic presentation. Doesn't show any of the gameplay, but those cinematics, I really can't imagine them running at 60 FPS. They just looked really, really good. Especially, they showed off that really cool volumetric sim of a barrel. And that looked really good. And I can't imagine that running at 60 FPS at a reasonable resolution where the developers... That's another thing, like you can push... Perhaps there's games where the CPU can actually... There's enough breathing room there with some nicks and tucks as well on top of the 30F presentation where they could get it to a reasonable 60. But then like Oliver said, maybe the resolution degradation that would occur as a result of that might not be worth it, or it may have knock-on effects to things like the game is using ray traced reflections and or ray traced GI. We're bumping those things, the resolution down to a certain level where they're already, for example, they're like, if you're running RTGI on a console, it's already quarter res. It's going to be already quarter res. And what if that's quarter res of 1080p? But what if it's quarter res of 540p? Like you're going to be having issues at that point of actually like convergence. So even if it's technically possible on a GPU, it may not be worth what it does to the image at the end. So developers may say, let's just not do that.
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately 30 FPS has been a part of console gaming for a very, very long time. I mean, Ridge Racer came out 1994. It's 30 FPS, 60 in the arcades. Ultimately, if you want to push visuals hard on a fixed platform, and we've said this so many times now, something's got to give. And 30 FPS is an acceptable compromise for a mainstream box with fixed resources, right? It's never going to be as powerful as the most powerful PC. Therefore, developers have to adjust their design targets. And 30 FPS can be absolutely fine. Forza Horizon 5, I kind of prefer playing that at 30 FPS on the Series X rather, because you gain so much over the 60 FPS in terms of the presentation in so many respects. And I guess Final Fantasy 16, I think that did seem to be a game that was built for 30 and had a 60 mode kind of kludged on at the end that just wasn't that great. I think ultimately, if you want to push the state of the art, you've got to accept that calculating all the rendering is going to take longer, and 30 FPS is therefore the acceptable compromise. Yes, so whether we should be happy about it, I don't know, but it's just the reality of game development. Let's move on to the next and final question. This one from Shilon Xiao. Hello everyone at DF exclamation point. I've seen a video, Moore's Law is Dead, I believe, where he roughly estimates the power of the Switch 2 or Super Switch, as I prefer, being somewhere between Steam Deck and the Series S. Also, a lot of the conversation around Microsoft handheld imagines it as a Series S refocused into a portable device. My question is how likely we see in the next couple of years handheld with proper console pricing with the equivalent power of Series S. I think this is two separate discussions. We've already covered the concept of basically transferring Series S performance into a handheld. It can't be done for a long, long time. However, when you're looking at Switch 2, you're looking at a very different type of device, which is an NVIDIA-powered machine, which is built on a very, very different architecture that has ray tracing support hardware built into it. It should scale quite nicely. It's got DLSS, which means that you can render from much lower resolutions, and it will still look decent. So yeah, I don't buy this concept that it's going to be more powerful than a Steam Deck or even, close to Series S. It's just not going to happen. But it shouldn't need to, because you'll be getting bespoke ports built to the quality level afforded by the hardware capabilities of the Switch 2. And if you look at what the Switch 1 did in comparison to the poverty nature of the specification that it had, I think it was a triumph. And I expect to see the same thing happening with Switch 2. Oliver?
Yeah, I think with the Super Switch or Switch 2 or whatever you want to call it, I wouldn't think of it as like a static quantity. I would say the raw rendering power is one thing, and we could say that's maybe roughly in the ballpark of a last-gen console. But then you have storage, the CPU, the GPU features, and those are all ahead of last-gen consoles to some degree or another, and might be able to be exploited to some degree depending on the game, and that might let it punch above its weight, but it will depend on the game. Might be viable for some titles targeting certain resolutions, may not be viable for others when it comes to technologies like DLSS, for instance. So I would say, is it as powerful as the Series S? I don't think those combinations of technologies will allow it to be as powerful as the Series S. I really doubt that. But could it punch above its weight? Could it achieve a better result than a Steam Deck? Sure, but I wouldn't call that being more powerful necessarily. I'd just say it's using its power differently, sort of. That's how I would think of it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right. That's all I would say too. Like it's going to be using different technologies to achieve its results than what a Series S would have, and it's also going to have extremely different. Steam Deck has a limited battery life. The OLED is better at this, but I think Switch is going to be targeting battery life than even a Steam Deck OLED. Like how long you can play a game for, I presume, based on the OG Switch. So its constraints are different, and you have to balance that always into the equation. Like the power is not the only thing that matters, and it's more about the experiences it allows, and also how long can I actually play this thing while jetting across the Atlantic or Pacific.
Or at least Pacific Oceans.
Yeah, it's the only way I'd imagine using one. So
Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Red Sea. No.
None of that. It's got to be at least one of the 7 C's, Rich.
So I entirely agree. It is basically going to be bespoke software built from the ground up for that specific machine. And yes, there will be nips and tucks, and you've got to trust the developers to make the right calls there. And sometimes it will work, and it will look great. And the Rebellion games, for example, we often cite them as looking astonishingly close to the PlayStation 4 versions of the same game. And there are differences, but when the screen is so small, it's irrelevant. And you'll see the same thing happening on Switch 2. And but equally, there will be ports that aren't great, which won't be as good. And I guess you probably wish you did have the horsepower for Series S at that point. But as we've talked about, it's just not going to happen in that respect. But yes, $399 tops. I think that's basically where they're going to be aiming for. But I guess we just need to wait and see. But that is the final question of the show, and therefore the end of the show. So if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for whatever messages may or may not appear on your phone. DF Supporter Program, join us, become part of our community, submit questions to the show, get early access to the show, early access to a bunch of content actually. And store.df.net. I'm contractually obliged to point you to that URL where you shall discover a range of wondrous merchandising based on the Digital Foundry brand. But that's all from us for this week. Yes, as ever, thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.